Hello, my name is Bill Cooke, and I want to speak to you a bit about one of Poland's greatest daughters, Ernestine Rose, as she's known in the English-speaking world. Ernestine Rose is known as one of the most staunch campaigners against slavery. She is known as a staunch campaigner for women's rights, but she's less well known, and she should be well known, as a staunch defender and campaigner for atheism. And it's in that capacity I'd like to speak to you today. It all comes from really one address that she gave in April 1861 in Boston in the United States of America. It's called now A Defense of Atheism. This is a pioneering account by Ernestine Rose. Why is it so good? She was an exceptional communicator. She spoke to very large audiences throughout the United States. She was a gifted speaker, and people remembered her for decades afterwards. We, of course, only now have her written accounts, but I think we can still get a sense of her power and the power of her mind, as well as the power of her rhetoric, from this account, A Defense of Atheism. So, most of the people, when they speak about Rose, talk about her debt to Robert Owen. Now, that's very correct. She did have a large debt to Robert Owen, but there are other interesting intellectual origins that we can see in her account of atheism as well. We can see the importance of Baron Holbach, whose book A System of Nature was very influential for naturalist and materialist thinking. We can see the influence of Alexander Humboldt, whose talk of the interconnectedness of nature is crucial to understanding Ernestine Rose. And we can see the importance of Ludwig Feuerbach, whose talk of God as a projection of human thought is also there to be seen in Ernestine Rose's thought. So, the address that Ernestine Rose gave is relatively short. It's only 39 paragraphs, and significantly she starts with a defense of science, and she talks about science's challenge to the traditional theological account of creation and of the universe. Only after talking about that and going through methodically each of the sciences, physics, chemistry, geology, and so on, and giving a brief summary of where each of those sciences is, which shows her very broad reading, and how that is contradictory to the classical account in Genesis and among Christian theologians. Once she's done that, then she moves on to Christian theology and shows how those claims no longer are credible. By paragraphs 19, she summarizes her case. In paragraph 20, she asks whether her account is reasonable, and so she looks at the way that her position could be criticized. So it's not dogmatic thumping at any time. She's looking at the way that her points can be criticized and defending them from there. Then she moves into the classic accounts of the cosmological argument for the existence of God and the argument from design and all those sorts of things. She talks about the laws of nature, the dangers of superstition. She deprecates the notion of the universality of religion, that we're all somehow religious in some way or other. And she finishes by showing that morality is independent of religion. These are facts that we pretty well take for granted now, but they really had to be argued for strongly in the 1860s. One of the clear claims that he's talking about is to say that everything, and this is her following both Holbach and Humboldt, everything is a product of nature. Everything is interdependent. She's not a reductionist in the way that people who criticize scientism would claim. She talks about the interdependence of nature in a way that's quite admirable. One of the ways that you can see Holbach's influence is when she talks about motion. Now, this was a very prominent factor of Holbach's thinking. This is Holbach speaking, everything in the universe is motion. The essence of matter is to act. If we consider its parts attentively, we shall discover that not a particular enjoys absolute repose. Now, that's Holbach. but that's very much what Ernestine Rose was saying through her address as well. When it comes to the uniformity, the regularity, and the interdependence of nature, which is another significant part of Rose's understanding of science, which she has taken largely from Alexander Humboldt. With respect to chemistry, she calls that nature's great laboratory. She then goes on to talk about the indestructibility of matter and its inherent property, motion. Moving on there, she looks at what Feuerbach talked about. In describing God, he delineated his own character. The picture he drew represents in living and ineffaceable colours the epoch of his existence, the period he lived in. That's Rose speaking as she talks about how God is an invention of humans, as we have arrogantly assumed that our importance justifies a God. Ignorance, she says, is the mother of superstition. So, having given an account of the sciences from Holbach, from Humboldt, and from Feuerbach, she's ready to go into the theological criticisms. So, with respect to the universe, Rose asks, the mere fact of its existence, the universe's existence, does not prove a creator, which so many theologians had argued. Then how came the universe into existence? We do not know. But the ignorance of man is certainly no proof of the existence of a God. Yet upon that very ignorance it has been predicated and maintained. So again, there's no arrogant declaration of knowledge that she has no position to, no way of defending. But she's criticizing the Christian argument from ignorance. What we don't know, therefore we must fill that space in with a God. She's not having any of that, quite rightly. What is intelligence, she asks? It is not a thing, a substance, an existence in itself, but simply a property of matter, manifesting itself through organizations. That is so reminiscent of Humboldt, and later on Bertrand Russell would have loved that. Looking at the argument from design, she says, everything is wonderful, and wonderful just in proportion as we are ignorant. But that does not prove design or designer. But did things come by chance, I am asked? Oh no, there is no such thing as chance. It exists only in the perverted mind of the believer, who, while insisting that God was the cause of everything, leaves him without a cause. So she's not prepared to take this binary that so many theologians like of, if it's not God, it must be chance. Not prepared to do that. At this point, having established her position quite well, she has a wonderful piece of rhetoric, the sort of thing that you imagine she would be saying in so many of her addresses. I'll read it to you. She asks, is the world saved? Saved from what? From ignorance? It is all around us. From poverty, vice, crime, sin, misery, and shame? It abounds everywhere. Look into your poorhouses, your prisons, your lunatic asylums. Contemplate the whip, the instruments of torture and of death. Ask the murderer or his victim. Listen to the ravings of the maniac, the shrieks of distress, the groans of despair. Mark the cruel deeds of the tyrant, the crimes of slavery, and the sufferings of the oppressed. Count the millions of lives lost by fire, by water, and by sword. Measure the blood spilt, the tears shed, the sighs of agony drawn from the expiring victims on the altar of fanaticism. And tell me, from what was the world saved? What a fantastic piece of rhetoric. You can, even 150 years on, that still has the power to move. So, with these sorts of things, she was able to establish an intellectual case, but a moral case for atheism, because in many respects that is the strongest claim for atheism. Yes, we have all these convincing and compelling scientific and philosophical accounts, but essentially atheism is a moral claim. It's a claim about humans not mattering to the universe, and we've just got to get used to that. Now, Rose understood that, I think, very well indeed. She said, as well might we use the term Episcopalian, Unitarian, Universalist to signify vice and corruption as the term atheist, which means simply a disbelief in God. Because finding no demonstration of his existence, man's reason will not allow him to believe, nor his conviction to play the hypocrite and profess what he does not believe. So we just need to be honest with ourselves, and let's not worry too much about the words that we employ. It's a remarkable account. 8 years after Rose's defense of atheism, Thomas Henry Huxley felt embarrassed enough by atheism to feel the need to coin the term agnosticism, which celebrated, as far as he was concerning, his intellectual humility and in terms of what he didn't know. But atheism is not, if you look at Rose's atheism only 8 years beforehand, her atheism is not an example of any sort of intellectual presumption or arrogance. Indeed, it is based on science, and what we don't know, we're not prepared to just presume is there for our delectation as humans, or that there's a God to fill in the gaps. So the worry that Thomas Henry Huxley had about dogmatism, or arguing against knowledge, or arguing where we should be silent, is not apparent in the work of Ernestine Rose. So she really needs to be understood and recognized and celebrated as an exemplar of morally humble but intellectually rigorous atheism. Maybe the only place that she could be slightly criticized, and you need a large dose of hindsight to do this, at the very end of her address, she says, though I cannot believe in your God, whom you have failed to demonstrate, I believe in man. I have no faith in your religion. I have faith, unbounded, unshaken faith, in the principles of right or justice and humanity. Now, that's a fine piece of rhetoric, but I'm a bit uncomfortable with talking about faith in man. I think we need to be not doing that in the 21st century, but it's hardly reasonable to be blaming Ernestine Rose for saying that 150 years ago, before thinking in these terms had become apparent. So, Ernestine Rose is a very, very noble champion. She's a noble champion of the abolition of slavery, of women's rights, and of atheism. And people born in Poland should be proud of this Polish-born, free-thinking, pioneering woman. So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope this has been useful to you, and enjoy the rest of the time. And remember, Ernestine Rose, a free-born Polish champion. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.